fertilizer subsidy is now new. President William Ruto said in the first 100 days is going to deliver subsidized fertilizer. It was on a high of 6,500 shillings, going by the AP, also going by the ammonium and all that. But now you could get it as low as 3,500 shillings. Guess what? Is not the only one who has done this. Every other government, in fact, if you remember, even his competitor, Raila Amolo Odinga, said he was going to subsidize fertilizer. So if he's not the first one to do that, and it's not the very first time that we're going to say this, can't we rely on subsidized fertilizer to revive agriculture? If it's been there, why has it not worked? Who better to have that conversation with us today other than a development specialist, seeds and climate smart agriculture? Let me introduce to you Noel Templar. Noel, welcome to Lookupbusiness. Just 15 seconds because I know we're going to come back and look into that issue. Do you believe that indeed subsidized fertilizer can revive Kenyan agriculture sector?
Thanks a lot, Simba. I think in a nutshell, fertilizer could be a solution, but I'm more inclined to talk about other alternative fertilizers that are not necessarily chemical fertilizers. Pretty much.
Other than that, there are other issues that we're going to talk into that particular conversation. My name is Simba. Let's start like this. Did you listen to your president yesterday? If you did indeed, these are some of the issues that he spoke on. Number one, he also spoke about the 3,000 fertilizer subsidy program that is already going on in the country. Number two, he did also speak about the 50 billion hustler fund. Number three, he spoke about NSSF and why you and I need to pay more. Number four, he spoke about CDF, which we do know the courts have already ruled as illegal. He wants to bring them back. Not and meant much more here on a Lookupbusiness. My name again is Simba Charles Kaige. We are live at Lookup TV across all your social media platforms. Let's get started by looking at what we're prioritizing right now, as much as your biggest business headlines are concerned. President William Ruto has laid bare the ailing state of the country's financial status. Now, the head of state says the ballooning national debt remains the biggest threat to the economy. And as a reporter Hombre Tender now files, President Ruto has recommended a raft of measures he believes will be critical in restoring the economy back on track, including overhauling the tax collection system.
Honorable Speakers of the National Assembly and Senate.
In his maiden speech as the head of state in a bicameral parliament, President William Ruto did not mince his words while discussing the economic status of the country. The head of state noting the country was facing a worrying financial scenario occasioned by a ballooning national debt.
I have news, and it is not very good news. Our financial situation is not very good. For Kenya to grow to an upper income country, we need to invest at least 25% of our GDP. Our current national savings is below 10% of our GDP, which translates to an investment savings deficit of 15% of our GDP. Over the last decade, we have sought to close this gap with public borrowing.
The president, in a concerned tone, decrying over-reliance on borrowing to finance the country's recurrent expenditure.
We're all aware that our total collection is 2.1 trillion, which is only enough to pay debt and to pay salaries. Everything else, we have to borrow. The government members should never borrow to finance recurrent expenditure.
To address the immediate economic turmoil the country is facing, President Ruto has mandated the Treasury to look for funds to reduce financing of this fiscal year with borrowed funds.
Over the next 3 years, we must reverse this and go back to the situation where government contributes to the national saving efforts by keeping recurrent expenditure below revenue. To this end, I have instructed Treasury to work with ministries to find at least 300 billion shillings in this year's budget so that we can remove it, because the market cannot sustain the kind of borrowing we are doing as government.
In the long term, the head of state has proposed a shift in the way the country conducts its business.
On the revenue side, I am committed and determined to ensure that our tax system is responsive to the needs of the economy. It must be equitable, efficient, and customer-friendly. The economic principle of equitable taxation requires that the tax burden reflects ability to pay. This is best achieved by a hierarchy that taxes wealth, then consumption, then incomes, and lastly trade, in that order of preference, so that those who are wealthy and have the capacity to pay should pay more, and those at the bottom of the pyramid should pay what is proportional.
The Commander-in-Chief planning to realign the Kenya Revenue Authority tax collection system to make it more responsive and friendly to the Kenyan taxpayer.
We are overtaxing trade and undertaxing wealth. We will be proposing tax measures that begin to move us in the right direction. We will also work with the Kenya Revenue Authority on a culture change to make it a people-friendly, customer-centric organization. I am of the view that we should rename it the Kenya Revenue Service, in line with the proposed transformation.
Additionally, there will be an overhaul of the NSSF system to guarantee Kenyans a decent retirement benefits kitty. Whether or not these measures will address the country's bad-performing economy is a wait-and-see situation. Henry Tende, Lookup TV.
Kenyans are yet again staring at increased cost of loans after the Central Bank of Kenya's monetary policy increased the key lending rate by 75 basis points to 8.25%. In a similar move by majority of central banks around the world, the Central Bank of Kenya noted that the latest move was informed by the skyrocketing local inflation, which touched 8.5% in August from 8.3% in July. The committee last raised the rate by 50 basis points at its sitting in May to counter the rising inflation, as well as stabilize a shilling that seemed to be tumbling against the dollar. This will now mean that Kenyans will pay more for loans as banks adjust to the new rate that has been set by the central bank. Central banks around the world have been increasing the lending rates sharply as runaway inflation occasioned by the Russia-Ukraine crisis continues to shake top economies across the world. Last week, U.S. Federal Reserve hiked interest rates by another 0.75 percentage point, the third time it was doing so in a row, followed by the Bank of England's 9 members who increased the rate by 0.5 percentage points to 2.25%. On the back of the latest review, however, CBK indicated that Kenya's economy has continued to show resilience as food shortages, a weak shilling, and imported inflation threaten to cause a spike in consumer good prices. For Lookupbusiness, Simba, Elijah Charles Kaige. Now, after the new Nairobi government came into place, there was a promise that all the operations of Nairobi County government were going to be removed from NMS back to the county offices. Let's join our reporter Henry Tender live at the Nairobi County offices where the handing over ceremony, from NMS to Nairobi County government is taking place.
As the MCAs, one of our key roles is oversight, and of all the processes, all the activities that were done, we'll be very happy to work together in terms of oversighting whatever was done and being able to bring to account for every shilling and every value for the shilling for the benefit of Mwananchi in terms of oversight. I thank you.
Thank you very much for those remarks. Indeed, the County Assembly, and allow me to congratulate you for being sworn in. All the MCAs were sworn in yesterday. Hongera. Walikuwa MCAs elect until yesterday. Now they are properly constituted. I also want to congratulate our new Speaker, Honorable Ken Gondi, and the Deputy Speaker, Honorable Kados, on the election. On top of anchoring the County Assembly Forum, I have been persuading my colleagues, governors at COG, that we want county assemblies to be financially independent, that you can get your budget directly, not through the executive. And that is a process that I hope, together with the Intergovernmental Relations Committee and the State Department of Devolution, because it will still exist, we can make sure it happens, so that the county assemblies get their funding directly for you to do oversight. I believe in oversight. I have been a legislator for the last 10 years. I know the power of representation.
Ceremony goes on. Now, while economic analysts allowed the appointment of Professor Njuguna Ndung'u for the position of Cabinet Secretary Treasury and National Planning, economic analysts now say that his work is already cut out as he faces a tough balancing act to support President William Ruto to deliver on his agenda while keeping debt levels in check. With Ruto calling on a 300 billion shillings cut on expenditure, analysts say that Njuguna, who served at the Apex Bank during Mwai Kibaki's tenure, has to observe tight fiscal discipline to navigate through the challenges of inflation, debt repayment, and development.
Most of my analysis, I choose to be quite optimistic in my forecasts, though sometimes things don't look that way. Remember when Kibaki was coming to power, our economy was so beaten that in fact IMF had given us a lot of structural adjustment programs that we were grappling with. There was retrenchments all over. There was a lot of cash crunch. The interest rates were skyrocketing. I think we were doing 20-30% at that time. And when Kibaki came into power, I think Njuguna Ndung'u played a very important role in trying to manage that season, and we were able to stabilize. Where we are today is bad, yes, but it's not as bad as where we were in 2001, 2002. So I want to believe that this duo, that is Njuguna Ndung'u and Patrick Njoroge, is a good pair to see us through to the next level. Of course, they'll have to do this with a lot of integrity. That is sometimes where we fail as a country, because we put our best resources forward, but we let them down by people wanting to corrupt their ways into those systems. So if the political side can ensure that we don't have any major corruption scandals within this season, then I want to believe that these two can see us through to a proper recovery path, albeit with our debt burden.
Preparation for COP27 to be held in Egypt in November this year, Climate Story Lab Africa has held a convention on climate change and mitigation measures, bringing together stakeholders in environment conservation. Environmentalists have called on the government to move with speed and put into action climate policies to reverse effects of climate change, especially at a time when Kenya is facing acute food shortage as a result of the current drought. Edwin John Mukora was in attendance.
In the wake of the adverse drought and food shortage ravaging the country, affecting more than 4 million Kenyans in 23 countries, Climate Story Lab Africa has brought together stakeholders from Kenya, Benin, Nigeria, Uganda and Tanzania in efforts for climate action in Africa.
That is what they are going to do, and that's what their children will do.
The event furthered the conversation for the need to embrace alternative energy sources and advocating for environmental conservation, especially on curbing deforestation. Mudamba, the program's director at DocuBox, the East African Documentary Film Fund, emphasized on using film for storytelling in mitigating climate change and drought by sensitizing the communities.
And moving images is film. And because you're using film for impact, we have seen the kind of impact that film has been able to achieve. As an example, a film called Thank You for the Rain was able to go back to Mutomo in Kitui and be able to provide a dam which was built because of the film, which is taking care of over 250 families. That is something that the impact of film has brought. And then the planting of trees and the ecosystem around changing because of that dam, we are already mitigating against climate change.
Felix Mwaki from Kenya Climate Innovation Center has painted the picture of the extreme drought and food shortage situation the country is facing, advocating for technology and alternative use of resources to mitigate the climate change.
It is bad if you really go to places like coasts, if you go to northeastern, if you go to a number of ASO areas, not only ASO areas, actually if you go to the areas that where people thought actually they are good in terms of rainfall. And I'll give an example in Meru. I mean, there's a lot of food insufficiency in a number of counties in Meru, including the Rakanidi. So the issue is, it is quite heavy, and people need to take these climate change issues very seriously and try to really think of alternative, adaptive ways that they can be able to adapt using the resources that we have. So, truth be told, it's quite bad.
Migori Senator Eddie Okech took the opportunity to urge communities to employ agriculture practices that are environmental friendly, while asking county governments to set aside a fund to be used to mitigate the food shortage situation in the country.
That most of our local communities still cut trees to be able to use them as firewood, and that alone is a very big economy. So what we need to make sure that we do is highlight the issue of climate change, so that local communities can know and have visibility in understanding climate change are increased. So it's a combination of government policy and community education that must continue to go on. Investment comes in, and then education also comes in to sensitize our people to be able to have the right practices.
As the environment pollution continues to contribute to climate change, which is causing food shortage as a result of drought in the country, it is the responsibility of the community and government to find alternative ways of using energy so as to solve these crises. Edwin John Mukora, Lookup TV.
Edwin John Mukora. Now, counties in northern Kenya have been ranked as the worst in terms of uptake and repayment of affirmative funds. This comes at a time when 23 counties in arid and semi-arid lands have been heavily affected by drought, leading to loss of livestock and their livelihood. Speaking in Naivasha, the chairperson of Uwezo Fund, Professor Losenge, confirmed that they were working with the stakeholders to improve the uptake and repayment of the loans. The chairperson of Women Enterprise Fund, Professor Wanjiku Kabira, also indicated that there was need to reduce the registration requirements for the Women Enterprise Fund to have more women on board.
Also, when you come back, we'll have a few minutes to get into the presentations.
There is also natural problem in some areas, possibilities of businesses being able to flourish in the blue areas because of the nature of activities there relative to the grey areas that we saw, particularly in the frontier counties of Kenya, because people engage in businesses to do with livestock. With climate change, these activities that are businesses that are pegged on the rainfall, on the animals, have suffered a lot for the last few years in Kenya. But we had actually considered very seriously that we may need to reduce to 3 months. But the purpose of this long duration of a grace period is to enable you to build enough income, enough profit so that you can be able to repay the loan with time.
Requirements, particularly for women's enterprises which are small, to be formalized rather than informal, trying to recruit them into the formal economy has a lot of expenses. So we're saying that generally the policies that deal with our own businesses need review in order to be much more friendly to the, to the women.
Yes, a group of persons whose aim.
Question is, how are the markets going to close today? That we still don't know. We're going to look at it on Monday. But then there are some particular counters that we've been following. And by the way, if you're really smart about this markets, then this week or for the entirety of this year, when every other person is crying about how energy and energy crisis is really facing the world, then you should look at the energy stocks. Let's look at the biggest gainers from yesterday. And indeed, we do have an energy stock, Total, 25 shillings and 25 cents. That's a positive of 9.78%. And let's look for another energy stock as well. Yes, Umeme Limited, 7.7. That is 4.9% increase. So that is exactly how you look at how the markets have been trending this week in terms of the biggest gainers. All right, let's look at those ones who've lost this week in as much as yesterday's trading was concerned. And that means that we have to look at the top 5 biggest losers. And by the way, same thing that we've seen here. And I will tell you, NCBA, not a big loser, but in this sense though, because this week we've been seeing them get on the biggest gainers list and also come back to the biggest losers list. So the difference, by the way, is 3 shillings in that particular counter. And those 3 shillings are enough then to give you a negative 4.61% drop. And that's huge as well. CIC coming in at negative 5.21%. Well, we do know on exactly what is happening with the rest of them because this has remained the same throughout. Not so much of a surprise for Uchumi. Then let's see how the markets are closing this week in as much as the biggest movers are concerned. Yes, things are cooling down. But then KPLC is back on that list again with 1,091,500 because Thursday's close of business, they didn't even break to the 1 million mark. So there could be some interest again in KPLC. So we do expect that this is going to go on. I thought we will see Safaricom at more than 2.8 million because we do know they've announced they're going to give us the half-year results as well. We're waiting for that. But then again, Kenya Reinsurance, you will look at where they are, 158,400, telling you how the markets ended yesterday. Not so much money in the market. Going by this, Safcom, 2.8 million. Kenya Re, 158,400. Banking quarters, we do only have KCB, and they did not make it to the 1 million mark. Talk about reduced liquidity, which could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you're looking at it. But breaking news from NSC, Nairobi Business Ventures. If you do know about that particular stock, by the way, you could get it for 3 shillings. Biggest they've ever gotten to was 5 shillings when they announced that they will be prioritizing, they will be changing their business portfolio. They're now into manufacturing, cement to be specific. Uchumi is not doing that well, so you wonder how they're going to be around that area with increased manufacturing costs and airline business as well. Now they are officially out of the gems segment into the main market segment. Maybe a conversation then we should have, is it time for you to buy NBV? I promise you, next week, let's look into that particular stock right here on Lookupbusiness. Guess what? We take a short break, but once we come back, Noel is with us still in the studio then. Let's ask the question, this subsidized fertilizer, is it the magic bullet to reviving agriculture? By the way, Kenya is still food insecure. Wow. Once we come back.
After a year packed with top-level events in various clubs, we are back to where it all began. The Corporate Masters Golf Series is back at Royal Nairobi Golf Club.
Golf is really growing in Kenya also.
With a touch of luxury, presented by Fumba Town. Make it possible to own your own beachfront property all the way in Zanzibar. Accuracy on every shot you take, made possible by Innovus Group, the leaders in business and financial advisory, assurance and business technology advisory. On October 1st, you can soar with the Eagles, courtesy of Angela Aviatrix Charters. Come, hit the reset button with some scotch made available to you by the Glen Levate from Pano Ricard, Kenya. Register your corporate team to get lucky with the Bet Lion Team Award. Lady golfers, you have more reason to sign up for this event because Godrej, with their mega growth, will be at the cost to help your hair match your long drives. Mega growth calls upon non-golfing ladies to come take part in a golf clinic at the golf range. Come take part in the 7th Corporate Masters event with Kenchik taking care of your breakfast to ensure that we're hitting them long and straight. For those who can't make it, catch all the action on Lookup TV, our official media sponsor. Corporate Masters, represent your brand. This event has been brought to you by
Changamka leo, changamka cheza loto, leo ni leo, changamka cheza.
Kumbuka kwamba kesho hii gari inaweza kuwa yako. Unakuwa promoted kutoka kuwa passenger, alafu unakuwa promoted unakuwa dereva mwenyewe. Unangoja nini? Probox inaenda kesho.
Over 18s only. Gaming can be addictive. Play responsibly. This message has been approved by the BCLB.
Changamka cheza loto.
For decades, our people have endured systematic oppression and unimaginable discrimination.
Beauty and Fashion College is focused on being the leading technical and vocational training institute in the region. Our team possesses in-depth knowledge and extensive experience in the industry, offering thorough training in cosmetology, hairdressing, interior design, creative arts, training of trainers, nail technology, and fashion design. With branches in Nairobi, Thika, Meru, Eldoret, and now in Mombasa, our courses ensure that learners are completely equipped with knowledge, competency, and employability skills. Enroll today to be a part of a center of excellence.
Subsidized fertilizer. If you're Kenyan, all the 5 presidents, I don't want to tell you the number of presidents we've had in this country, you do know, 5. And if you can't count, and you have 3 seconds, good, thank you very much. All of them, they have subsidized fertilizer. Now, let me pick former President William Ruto's government, and this is exactly what is the talk of town right now in terms of the subsidized fertilizer. Good. Let me start with DAP. You can get it for 3,500 shillings, by the way. CAN, you can get it for 2,875. Urea, you can get it for 3,500. NPK, 3,275. MOP, 1,175. Sulfate ammonia, 2,220. Indeed, if we go back then and see where we've come from in terms of this subsidized fertilizer, again, if we go back to the economic survey of 2022, it has been coming in. In fact, in 2021, we did bring into the country 758,456.5 tons of fertilizer into this country. So it was there. It was not that it wasn't there. But ask anybody, even with all the 5 presidents that we've had in this country subsidizing fertilizer, one thing is going to be obvious, and exactly what was going on right now in 23 counties, by the way. That's almost half this country. You're talking about them potentially facing acute food shortage because of the ongoing drought. And you've also seen the president actually send relief food across the country. So the question is going to be then, does subsidized fertilizer revive agriculture? And we do have Noel. Noel, how are you doing, sir?
I'm fine.
Let's talk about it.
Simba.
Does it? Let's begin from there before we get then to look into the issues even within this fertilizer.
Good. Thanks again for having me. I think we have to start from a point of information.
Yes.
You and I have grown up in areas that farmers are producing food.
Yes.
Our parents have produced food. However, we have seen that either they have successfully taken their produce off the farm and to the market, or sometimes they have failed miserably because of the effects of climate change. I do not want to say, and authoritatively so, that fertilizers will actually revitalize agriculture, but I can confidently talk about the opportunity for us as Kenyans to think through what are the alternative solutions to the fertilizer crisis. I come from a point of knowledge where we have farmers who have literally, talked about them stopping farming or using fertilizer because it's, affecting their farms. But then there are farmers who have done it so well because they have, that information on how to produce and have been able to produce sustainably.
Yes.
So on the question that you've asked, I almost feel like the answer should be 50-50 in terms of there are people who have done well with fertilizer, and if they get more fertilizer and subsidies, they will do well.
Yes.
But then there's another 50% who feel that, no, this fertilizer has not worked for me. Whether it's subsidized or not, I think I need to take an alternative route.
Yes.
So I see an opportunity for us as a country to have this conversation now and be forthright with ourselves that we can still produce with fertilizer, but then let us think about what are the ways to resilient agriculture which do not necessarily need fertilizer. They need alternative forms of fertilizer, which are organic in nature.
Which are organic in nature. Just before we get into that as well, Noel, are you coming from the point that if indeed this fertilizer was going to work and make us food secure in this country, then it could have already worked going by how much focus has been given to it by the presidents who've gone before President Ruto?
You're spot on that. If something has been repeatedly done with the same result, then it means there's something has to be done differently.
Yes.
And my biggest issue with repeat cycles of things that do not yield different results is that we have good ideas, but then we are lacking on the point of ideals and practices. And when I talk about ideals, I mean, if something is not working, in monitoring and evaluation, we say this is not working and look for an alternative to it. In monitoring and evaluation, sometimes we come across things that can be innovated around, and we do exactly that. When it comes to practice, if farmers, for example, in North Rift have continued planting using a certain type of fertilizer and it has not worked for them, you should not push that same fertilizer to them. You should ask them what other thing will enable you to continue producing optimally and ensure that we are food secure as a country.
Yes.
And I am also, sort of insisting that we have to think about fertilization of the farm from a point of diversification of production.
Yes.
When we think about fertilizer, we almost correlate it with maize. If someone can do a different approach towards production, and let's talk about other crops that are also improving the soil so that we have to use less and less of fertilizer over time, then I would very much be happy to give a high five to that person.
Pretty much. Let's then settle into this conversation. When you see these announcements from the president, and by the way, if we're going by how many bags that we have to bring in, then we're looking at 32 billion worth of subsidy if we're going to talk about this fertilizer. Let's start from that, the monetary aspect of that, 32 billion. Do you think we could now start saying, if fertilizer is going to be a challenge for this country, could we then start talking about organic fertilizer as well? And now, where are we as far as this conversation is concerned, organic fertilizer?
You ask very good questions, but let me start from the numbers.
Yes.
We have 71,000 metric tons of fertilizer being in this subsidy program. That's almost equivalent to about 3.55 billion that is going directly into that. The questions that I am asking myself as a development specialist is there a way we could have saved some money off this subsidy? But that can only be answered by an understanding of whether the subsidy we are proposing is a targeted subsidy or is an overall subsidy to everyone. But it seems like it's almost targeted. However, there's we are still shrouded in mystery in terms of information. So how is it going to be implemented? I know there's been mention of NCPB as a central point where people pick it from, but then the question about logistics has not been detailed. So are farmers going to NCPB? Are they going to use their own transport to go and get that fertilizer? How many farmers are going to be targeted? Remember, when we are talking about 71,000 metric tons, we are looking at almost 1.4 million acres of land. The question about the crop we are going to focus on is also shrouded in mystery. Is it maize? Is it potatoes? I had, some of the fertilizer is going west. Some is it going to Nakuru and those sides.
Yes.
There's Olengroni, there's Molo, there's places where there's a lot of potato. And remember, potato, maize, and rice are very critical crops for our consumption.
Of this country. Yes.
But to get back to your question about whether the discussion is there, I know there's a lot of engagement that is already ongoing between different stakeholders with the Ministry of Agriculture to also consider and give it space for us to think through alternative forms of fertilizer. It's not a blanket solution, but we have to start from a point of information.
Yes.
I like that the president of Kenya talked about climate change as a big issue, meaning he's alive to the fact that we have an issue that is going to hit us so hard. It's already hitting us hard. More than half of the country is, starving, or so to speak, is being affected by drought.
Yes.
But where my concern comes from is if we are talking about fertilizer subsidy, and we are not talking about accompanying information and training to the farmers on how to use this judiciously and complement it with other sustainable land management practices that then over time reduce how much fertilizer they use on their farm, then the circus continues. The 6th president or the 5th president and the 7th president will still be speaking the same language.
About fertilizer subsidy.
Let's subsidize.
Yes. But when you look at that in monetary terms, because you like to think, and you saw he came in, he said, well, food security is an area that I have to address in this country. Would have you rather seen a proper analysis of them saying that for maize, this is exactly how much fertilizer that we're going to use for maize. For potatoes, this is exactly how much we're going to use for that as well. And then, as a development expert as well, because this is a challenge that has been in all the governments preceding William Ruto, would have you loved it to say, now let's open a conversation that out of these funds that we're setting aside for subsidy for fertilizer, then we talk about organic farming practices. Would have that made you smile as a development expert?
Yes, and you rightly put it because I think there's always been a concern about how much can we accelerate the commercialization and registration of organic fertilizers, for example. Some of these organic fertilizers can actually be produced at the farm level.
Yes.
So we don't have to rely on external inputs or external sources for that matter. We are having Ukraine and Russia fighting for quite some time now, and they're the bulk producers of that fertilizer. I mean, I know we have Morocco and the north of Africa where we still have, considerable deposits of phosphorus fertilizer, but like you say, there's an opportunity to have a conversation, a very candid conversation about, are there opportunities for organic fertilizers to be accelerated in terms of their commercialization and also their formulation?
Yes.
KEBS is here. KEFIS is here. All these people who are interested in agriculture, they should join the conversation and let's talk about it. One point that I want to mention here is subsidies come almost as a support measure. What the current government is trying to do, as they say, they are trying to increase production, but they're also cushioning the farmers from increased cost of fertilizer.
Yes.
Pretty much fair argument and really nice. However, I always want to believe that history helps us plan for the future. If being the fifth government in office has not allowed them a chance to look at this critically and talk about a more systemic solution to the challenge of the fertilizer crisis, then I think we will still be mark timing. The olive leaf that is probably being extended here, or the opportunity that is being availed here, is the chance of working with other like-minded people, working with farmers who are the producers, and understanding from where they sit. Is it more economical, both for them and the country, to focus on localized solutions? And if so, then is it an opportunity to work with women and youth who are also interested in some of these enterprises, and then set up ways that can produce locally, adaptable fertilizer solutions?
When you look across the board, Noel, because then if fertilizer is going to be a challenge, when you look at even the climate situation in the country right now, somebody asked this question: are we not making this conversation wholesome in the sense of it's as if in a larger way, we're closing our eyes on the other aspects of production that would essentially also be very, very critical in impacting our level of production? Is that an area that we also need to look into?
Thank you very much, Simba. We cannot shy away from the fact that food security...
Yes. No, let me just put that question up again.
Please.
In a percentage, how much is fertilizer contributing to our food security in this country?
Good question. But I will answer it in a different way, not directly as you wanted.
Yes.
When we talk about production, production is not a function of fertilizer alone. And actually, if I want to be a bit pessimistic of this initiative, I would simply talk about the success of this subsidy intervention is really dependent on whether we'll get rain or not. That's plain and simple.
That's where it starts from, isn't it?
Yeah. And so if there are no measures, we should always think two steps ahead. What if it doesn't rain and farmers have put fertilizer in the soil? All that seed is a waste.
And that was the question that was asked. At this time, when we are supplying this fertilizer, don't we have uneven patterns of weather around the country, even in areas, by the way, where our food basket is? They're not experiencing rainfall.
Exactly.
They're still waiting, isn't it?
And yeah, it's unfortunate, but then again, like nature punishes us for these things. Climate mitigation and adaptation, I think, is the bigger issue as well. Unfortunately, when people want to talk about climate smart agriculture, they often want to, think about some very high level kind of discussions and forget the basic things. For example, if I am not able to cover my soil and make it protected from too much sun or protected from heavy rain that will wash away the topsoil, then I'm not benefiting from that fertilizer if at all I applied it, because it will be washed away. Or maybe the environment within the soil will not allow the beneficial microorganisms to exist. But this conversation, a lot of people are shying away from it. Maybe because of interests, maybe because they don't know, or maybe because they know but they choose to keep silent. And I think that the last one is the worst of things, where you know the truth but you don't want to speak it up. I see an opportunity to change things around. And like I said, when we had the new constitution coming into place, I think there was a question of what would be devolved and what would not be devolved.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Agriculture became devolved. There were teething problems. There were issues around who is going to do what and who is not going to do what. And then there's a lot of cloud chasing as well. Who remains with a significant mandate to ensure food security?
Yes.
And I see a loophole that allows for blame game between the county and the national government. While on one hand, the county talks about empowering its constituents, the government is also talking about the nation and how it's empowering the nation to ensure productivity. But food security is not a one-man's affair. A food system is actually holistic. And if you don't talk to the farmers and don't talk to the policymakers and don't talk to the people who are the key decision makers, at the end of the day, we have a circus.
Yes.
Everyone is saying, oh, I did this, I did that, oh, I didn't get this, and I got this. And then at the end of the day, the blame game doesn't help anyone. All we do is look outside and get food aid. So this is something that has been perpetuated over the years, and I think it's about time now to shift gears. We have to tilt the needle to the right direction.
Yes.
And I think this government has an opportunity to do so. If this is their first port of call, the subsidy, I think right now they already need to think, what if it doesn't rain? All that fertilizer is a waste. All those farms are affected.
Yes.
And probably farmers will not be thinking again about getting fertilizer from the government.
My last question in this conversation, but I don't want to ask it now because there's a question that has been floated a lot more times when we're talking about this fertilizer subsidy.
Yeah.
On how long a fertilizer subsidy program, if it's well guarded and it goes to the right people, and by masses, if it decides to rain at the right time, at the right place, for us to start talking about being food secure. Let me just leave that to the side because I just want us to complete that this conversation like that. Another question in this conversation, large-scale farmers.
Mm-hmm.
Where are they in this conversation? Because no, I don't think they're going for the subsidy. And if they're not going for it, how do we put large-scale farming in this conversation of fertilizer subsidy? Because indeed, we do know they control to a larger degree some of these products that we're talking about. We're talking about potatoes, we're talking about maize as well. Where are they in this conversation?
Good question. I'm still asking the same question myself. Where are they in this conversation? But I'm almost inclined to note that in the past 4 times when subsidy has been effected by different governments, the large-scale farmer has somewhat been caught in the discussion about access to fertilizer. Why? They have the money, first of all, to buy, and they'll probably have better social and political connections. And that brings me to the question of now this targeted subsidy. Sometimes it's targeted to smallholder farmers, but who has the money to buy it?
It's large-scale farmers, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yes.
And then if, for example, there's a willing and able smallholder farmer who is able to buy. Let's give an example. They buy 100 bags at 3,500. That's approximately 350,000. But then they decide out of need, in business, you capitalize an opportunity. They sell it to Simba. At what price? 6,500. You know they make a cool 300,000. Clean money. But then you are targeting smallholder farmers to produce, but the smallholder farmer is thinking business. So for them, they were not targeted to actually benefit from that fertilizer on their farm, but rather in their pocket.
Yes.
And I think that's where the question about this entire subsidy is. If you are not able to measure the effectiveness of the subsidy from the word go, then you lose it. And I started by saying this particular subsidy intervention is still shrouded in a little bit of mystery. We don't know who is targeted.
Who it's targeting, isn't it?
We don't know that.
Because we've just seen farmers go for this.
Exactly. So at the end of the day, how do you measure effectiveness of that? And then if it doesn't rain again, how do you measure that?
Somebody asked again, should have they then waited for the non-seasons, which we do know, by the way, have been knocked off really bad across the world and in the country.
Yes.
Should have they waited for the planting seasons then in these areas they were targeting to come up and then say, we have a drive in this maybe 3 weeks or 1 month to supply fertilizer to these areas so that they can take them directly to the farms?
Yeah, I mean, that's almost the ideal situation that would have happened.
Because you have no mechanism just to know that whoever takes this fertilizer is going to use it.
Exactly.
And when they're going to use it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big problem that we have been facing around using, voucher schemes or subsidy schemes in guaranteeing access to fertilizer. And I'll tell you, when looking at what opportunities exist, I almost see that the next logical thinking step would be around how much can we save by not bringing in fertilizer? If we do it locally, how much can we save? If that conversation is started right now, then maybe we'll be making progress. The second thing is, whatever we have as local or organic solutions to productivity, if we are able to table evidence that they actually guarantee higher yields or better yields or consistent yields for the farmer, then maybe we'll start to have a critical conversation about this fertilizer issue. The third thing, which I think the president mentioned about, trying to save money here and there and making sure that the budget is actually good or in good form, might actually come from us realizing local productivity increases. And if this is possible, then I see an opportunity for us saving our foreign currency, because we import fertilizer in USD, US dollars, or foreign currency for that matter. That's a loss for us if you look at it critically.
Yeah, in terms of a forex.
But if we're able to do it locally, it means that we are building capacity of women and youth enterprises who are now able to come up with agri-inputs that are probably organic, that are very good for the soil and environment, that are guaranteeing them jobs, which I think this government is talking about, jobs for women and youth. If women and youth can be able to have enterprises that produce organic fertilizer, and KEBS supports them to make sure these fertilizers are actually to the standard needed, that are known to the required standards, and that are able to guarantee productivity, then I think we are going to save a lot of money from what we actually spend bringing in inputs from external sources.
Pretty much. Now, Noel, let's clear with this question, which was the biggest question that everybody asked.
Yes.
Fine. You're talking about a fertilizer subsidy, and you're saying that this time around you're going to guard it, make sure it's very effective, it goes to the people that it's supposed to go to, and then after that we support local production. You might have the answer, you might not, because majority of the people that I've spoken to have not given me that answer that I've been looking for. If indeed our seasons tick the boxes, like they've been ticking years before now, and the fertilizer goes to the right people, the right farmers, how long will we wait in this country, knowing very well 2030 is just 7 years from now, for us to start saying that this country is food secure? Are we that far? Give me that answer quickly.
We are better off thinking through reality. And for me, reality here is not over-relying on the 3 key staples: maize, potatoes, and rice. Those ones are fertilizer thirsty and hungry, whatever word you want to call it. The key metric to watch out for in achieving food security in the next 8 years, by 2030, is diversification. And diversification, I mean in production and in consumption. If that can be the language we speak and the conversations we have around our productivity circles, then we are probably going to be home and dry. And then the second level of discussion will be around what local solutions do we have. I mean, walk around here, you will see people, youth and women and men, working so hard every day to produce food organically. There's an entire world out here of people who are doing very well to protect their soil, to protect the water, to protect animals and the overall environment by using approaches that do not contaminate all these areas. But what they're lacking is support from the government. If that support can be rendered, trust you me, there's an alternative to use of these fertilizers. And by extension, there's an alternative to that fertilizer subsidy, which is costing us a lot, and probably we don't have effective mechanisms of tracking its effectiveness.
Oof, not clear. So it's not next year, but one. No altern. Thank you very much for coming by, man.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Now, taking back to the time that it came live right here at Lookupbusiness, Lookup TV across all your social media platforms. I do know you've sent in those questions. Guess what? I'll be forwarding them to him right away after this. I can even respond to you personally. He's a development expert. He's quite rich in this area. Guess what? I'll see you next week. That's it.
Yippee! Kamata floating at 349K. Oh yes, for only 349,000 Kenyan shillings, you become a